if this crisis deepens in, and there is no option, there's no much options. The crisis is going to come. It's not going to originate in Europe, I think. I think it's going to originate in the United States. But when the dollar collapses, the euro will collapse completely, and we will see again the rise of an extreme politicians. And you have, in the traditional discourse, extreme right and extreme left. But the extreme right wins by goleada, as they say in Spanish. No? Outright. Why? Because the discourse is more coherent. Not that I support it, but it's more coherent. The left cannot claim that we have to go to the Soviet Union. But there is a tradition in Europe of right-wing, there is a history, and this discourse will come out. Unfortunately, this is bad news for Islam, or perhaps good news for Islam, but bad news for the immigrants, because they will have to endure tough times in Europe. And that discourse of we will support you and all this thing, it will all disappear. Like we are hearing now in Greece, the first mathematics is very simple. It's 4 million unemployed, 4 million immigrants. We get rid of the immigrants, we get rid of unemployment, which is not true. But that's a very simple mathematics. Now all these things are happening, and capitalism is undertaking the biggest crisis ever. Is certainly what I thought they were going to pass this one. It seems that is much, much deeper than originally even I thought. And the process of this is the inevitable mathematical collapse of the US dollar and what follows from there. Now, this is all relevant to our question of muamalat, because we live in history and we live in this time. And the collapse of the system that is in place will help us in promoting what is the alternative. In fact, this is very relevant to this crisis, because what we see in the discourse of the people is that there is no alternative. I mean, the people are complaining against the banks, but there is no alternative to the banks. The people are complaining in the United States, occupying this, occupying Wall Street, occupying Madrid. There is a protest in London, everywhere. But there is no solutions, there is only complaints. Now, the only thing that I can offer a solution is Islam, and this is muamalat. Now, the right wing is offering a solution to it, but it's not a solution, it's a solution within capitalism. But it has certain elements that they are, at least you have to consider interesting or curious if you want. For example, one of the things they say is that they are against usury. I'm still trying to get the Islamic Party to agree that usury is forbidden in this country, because they haven't said so. And when they say so, they do it under the premises of Islamic banking is halal, which means it's a contradiction. But the right wing have this discourse against usury, and what they establish is the idea of nationalizing the banks. Now, nationalizing the banks makes sense, as a first step at least, because you say, what do you do with all these banks around here privately benefiting from the money they create out of nothing? They are creating money that doesn't exist, but that money, this new credit, is our money. So therefore it doesn't seem reasonable that a private entity takes benefit from the money created from us out of nothing. So in the early part of the century, which has now been forgotten, raised a movement called social credit. It was very, very powerful, and it was very popular within that right wing. It was created by an American called Colonel Douglas, and you perhaps have seen or heard of some of the people who have spoken of these matters, Wyndham Lewis or Ezra Pound, the famous poet. They were all advocates of these ideas. Surprisingly, these ideas also intertwined with anarchism, and there is a critique within there that it was totally wiped out in the interwar periods. World War II simply wiped out all these ideas. So the idea of social credit is very simple, and it doesn't solve the problem, but it is a step in the right direction. Is the nationalization of all the banks. If you nationalize the banks, the state benefits from the banks, but you still have usury. And while the money and the profit goes back to the state, still all the effects that usury produces are not eliminated. So even when they speak about being against usury, unfortunately, they do not mean by usury what we understand by usury. They still understand in that Christian manner of excessive or corruptive or abusive interest, while for us it's a much deeper matter, which there is not a little bit of adultery and there is not a little bit of riba, just the same. 1 grain of riba is riba.